I admit it, another hoe got me finished. Broke my heart, oh no you didn't. Fuck sipping, I'ma down a whole bottle.
The Griffins were watching the news one night, and they saw an emergency alert saying that there was going to be a hurricane and that Quahog was in its path of destruction, and that this would happen in a few days. The Griffins didn't think it would be that bad, so they decided not to evacuate and to just stay inside their house. The next day, it started to rain, and it continued to rain non-stop. And then, after a few more days, the wind started to pick up, and eventually the winds were up to 100 miles plus, maybe even up to 150 miles plus. And from inside their house, the Griffins could hear things being picked up and thrown everywhere outside. They thought as long as they just stayed inside, they could wait it out and nothing would happen. But they were severely mistaken. Peter and Brian were watching TV on the couch when all of a sudden they felt water, and when they looked down at the floor, they saw that the house was beginning to flood. Peter yelled for the rest of the family to come downstairs, and when they did, they saw what was happening, and they knew they had to get out of there. And so they began walking through the rising water to the front door. But when Peter tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. When they looked outside their house, they saw that the streets were filled with water. Everything was flooded, and the water was quickly rising. Eventually, there was so much water outside their house that the door couldn't hold any longer, and water came rushing into their house, quickly flooding it even more. And that's when Peter yelled for them to get upstairs. They managed to walk through the water in their living room and get upstairs and managed to get to the attic. That's when they noticed that Meg wasn't with them. They looked all around for her, but couldn't find her. They ran to the top of the stairs and looked at the living room, and that's when they saw her. Meg had tried to go with them, but her leg was stuck, and the water covered her entire body, and she drowned. The whole family was beginning to cry when they saw Meg's corpse, but they didn't have time to, since the water outside was still rushing in, and it was floating so high that it started to reach the top of the stairs. So, even though the Griffins didn't want to, they headed back to the attic. They knew that the water would rise up to them quickly. So, Peter and Brian broke a hole through the top of the attic and onto the roof, and the Griffins climbed onto the roof. As they were climbing, Chris slipped and was beginning to fall off. Lois saw this and tried to catch him, but she fell as well. And this resulted in the two of them landing in the water. And after struggling a bit, the two of them were swept out into the flooding water even more. and the two of them would suffer the same watery fate. The only ones left now were Peter, Brian, and Stewie. Peter realized that his daughter was dead, and his wife and son were now as good as dead, and there was nothing he could do. He became angry at himself, realizing just how much of a failure he had been. However, they didn't have time to mourn. The wind was picking up fast, and was easily going 200 miles plus. And since they were on a roof, it wasn't going to be good. Since Stewie was lighter, the wind had picked up so much that Stewie had been picked up and was being flown across the sky. Eventually, the wind threw Stewie into one of the neighbors' houses, and he was slammed against the side of the house. And the impact of this snapped his neck, and Stewie's lifeless body fell into the water. Peter had watched his second son and final child just die, and Brian watched his best friend die. The two of them couldn't do a thing about it, and now they realized that in order to get through this, they couldn't mourn, and could only focus on staying alive. As the water was rising, Brian looked into the water and saw something moving, and he quickly realized what it was. It was a shark. But how? He thought. How could a shark possibly be swimming in the road, even if it was flooded? While he was thinking this, the wind knocked Brian off the roof, and he fell into the water right next to the shark. And then the shark swam towards Brian and proceeded to eat him alive. Peter had lost his final family member. He lost his best friend. He lost his whole family. He was all alone now. Since Peter was heavier than everyone else, the wind didn't affect him as much, so he stayed on top of the roof until he was rescued by the Coast Guard. But Peter would have rather died than be left alive knowing that he had failed his family, and he had watched